Hello, fellow reading enthusiasts. Thanks for jumping back into the abyss with us. I'm Brittany.
I'm Hallie.
And we are super excited to bring you this episode. We both really like this book, so we're very excited to talk about it. Don't forget to follow us on all the social media, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook for all the updates. You can check out our website for links to all the stuff that we talk about and pictures from the cases and all kinds of information like that, which is super fun. If you want to see all of our past book club episodes, they're on our website under the ABC tab, the Abyss Book Club. And all of our regular cases are under the Cases tab, so you can check out our backlog of that as well. If you're listening on YouTube, please give us a thumbs up if you enjoyed the episode. Make sure you subscribe and hit the little bell notification button so you never miss an episode. And if you have any books that you think would be good for the book club that you really enjoyed, or maybe a book that you're excited to read that has to do with crime, you can send us a message on our contact form on our website, and we would love to get all of those recommendations. So without further ado, let's jump into it.
Just to kind of refresh your memory, or if maybe you tune in to the book club episodes just because you want to hear the true crime stories and you don't actually read the book, here's a little bit of backstory about what the book is about. We're going to give you the summary. Quote, everyone knows a couple like Jack and Grace. He has looks and wealth. She has charm and elegance. He's a dedicated attorney who has never lost a case. She's a flawless homemaker, a masterful gardener and cook, and dotes on her disabled younger sister. Though they are still newlyweds, they seem to have it all. You may not want to like them, but you do. You're hopelessly charmed by the ease and comfort of their home, by the graciousness of their dinner parties they throw. You'd like to get to know Grace better. But it's difficult, because you realize Jack and Grace are inseparable. Some might call this true love. Others might wonder why Grace never answers the phone, or why she can never meet for coffee even though she doesn't work. How she can cook such elaborate meals but remain so slim. Or why she never seems to take anything with her when she leaves the house, not even a pen. Or why there are such high security metal shutters on all the downstairs windows. Some might wonder what's really going on once the dinner party is over and the front door is closed. End quote.
A little bit of background on B.A. Paris, the author. She has authored several thrillers. She has worked in the fields of finance and teaching before becoming a best-selling author. She lived in France for a super long time, but currently lives in the UK with her husband. She has 5 daughters to keep her busy, and the movie rights for the book that we're covering today, Behind Closed Doors, have actually been sold, so it's possible we might see a film adaptation at some point. Her newest novel is called The Therapist, and it'll be out on July 13th. If you listen to this book, I'm not sure if it's in the print book, but I know in the audiobook at the end they have a little teaser for The Therapist, so we're excited for that to come out and read that. And that's pretty much it on B.A. Paris. There's not a whole lot out there about her, so we're going to jump into our thoughts on the book.
I absolutely loved this book. I thought it was so different from what we normally go for with books, where a lot of times it's like murder mystery when you think of a true crime novel, or you think of like kidnappings, obviously, like Gone Girl or something. I think that's a kidnapping. I actually haven't read the book.
It is not.
Oh, okay. Well, there's plenty of books like that where people go missing.
She was missing, but it was not a kidnapping.
Oh, gotcha. Well, I thought this was just like so cool and different from what you normally would read as like a true crime novel. Well, a fictional novel that can relate to true crime in our case.
I agree. I think it was very different, and I really enjoyed having kind of a flipped story where it's from the point of view of where it's from a different point of view. I think lately, especially, we've talked about how many repetitious themes we've seen in these books where it's like, oh, that's just like this past book, or it's like the same storyline or the same kind of characters. And this was just so different and so well written and very compelling, super engaging, like kept you on the edge of your seat all the time.
Yeah, I thought it was really well written, like the visuals and the dialogue between Jack and Grace. It just like gave me chills, and also surges of anger because, I was like, pop, pop, smack Jack. But in my mind, it was almost like watching a thriller movie unfold, like as if I was watching the movie Hush, if you've seen that. That's how I felt in my mind. I was like, oh my gosh, like what's going to happen next?
Yeah, it was really easy to put yourself in the story and get really good visuals on what was happening and really feel like you're seeing the story unfold like right in front of you, rather than some of the books we've read where it's like hard to get into and you're kind of like, oh, that's, you're constantly thrown in and out of the story, whereas this one you're just in it the whole time.
Exactly. And I love the like aspects she took with the book where it was different or kind of a connection that you may not have thought they would do, where, you know, her husband was actually fighting domestic violence cases in court, yet he was clearly married. And even though it was kind of a hostage situation more so than like him, you know, just beating up on his wife but still loving her, you know, like a lot of domestic violence cases, it's like, oh, I love her, but I'm also gonna like beat the crap out of her, right? Well, this was more like, I just am using you as a pawn in my little game. So even though it was kind of more of a hostage situation, they're married, it's still considered domestic violence. And so I thought it was really interesting that he also fought that in court, but yet he was like perpetrating it himself.
Yeah, it showed how people can really hide behind these highly curated facades. And it was also like the double meaning was revealed in the book, where it was like, on the one hand, he developed this persona so people would respect him and that he would be, you know, in with the cops and the judges and all these people and, you know, this highly respected position, and he's fighting for these battered women and all this stuff. And then on the other side, he was like feeding off the fear and the violence and the pain that his clients were sustaining. So that was a super interesting aspect to the book, where he was using it for, you know, using it to get his kicks, but he was also using it to cover up his life. I also loved the ending. I really like the revenge tropes, and I loved the revenge she took. I loved the female solidarity, the meticulous planning. I love how detailed the author went into, you know, each call that she made and each move that she made to make it seem like she was fitting this version of a wife that Jack had actually created. Like, he's the one that created this fictitious life that the two had, and this image that she was this perfect wife that was always doting on her husband and all that, and that he was this upstanding guy that had never lost a case, so it was like super important to him. And she used that against him in the end, which was awesome. The way that he died in the same way that he had killed the dog earlier was just awesome. Very satisfying resolution to me.
I agree. There was such an amazing ending to the story, and it kind of tied everything together. And the story itself was just so well thought out. And you can tell, like, she didn't just sit down one day and decided, like, I want to type this out and I'll tweak it up later. She probably had a whole timeline and plot story outline going on for it to be so perfectly executed. I even find myself like looking for flaws when I was listening. I was like, wait, so did this happen or this happen, or am I going to catch something that maybe she messed up and it actually doesn't connect and the author like boofed on it, but I like couldn't find anything. Yeah,
she really tied everything up nicely, and I'm glad that she went with kind of a very happy ending rather than, you know, I think another testament to her writing is like the whole time I was scared that Jack had planned all of this and he was going to be waiting there in the end and be like, oh, I created this situation so you would think that you could get away, but you can't. So the fact that she won in the end is awesome. I love that. And I agree. It was just a really good, really well written, really compelling book. And I very, very much enjoyed it.
Yeah, I loved the escape at the end with the pills, and I like found myself on the edge of the seat the whole time, like just praying that she was going to succeed with what she was doing. And I loved that Esther kind of came to her rescue, you know, like she was really bummed that Esther picked her up. She was like, oh, how am I going to pull this off? And then like little did she know, Esther was like, I've got you. Like, we may not be best friends, but I know what you were going through. And I know what his intention was now that I heard about that red room in the news. And she was like, I saw him wave by, so, and she was willing to cover for Grace.
Yeah, the solidarity there between her and Esther, the solidarity with Millie, who even when Millie didn't understand everything that was going on, she understand that Grace was in a really dangerous situation and like did her best to help her. And so it was just like a really good female empowerment story where it was like work together and defeat this evil thing.
Not even a person, a thing.
Just a thing.
Overall, like, you guys know I'm like 3 is like a good book, right? I think this is a 5 out of 5. Solid book.
We did it.
I loved it. It was so good.
I agree. 5 out of 5, 10 out of 10. Amazing. And with that, we're going to talk about the connections we found. And obviously this book was all about domestic abuse. And even though obviously in the book it was slightly different than your average domestic abuse case, we wanted to just talk about the issue and give some information on it and just spread more awareness. That never hurts. So as we all know, domestic violence is a huge problem worldwide. And with the pandemic, domestic violence hotlines have had these huge increases of calls. Hospitals in a lot of places are seeing more and more domestic violence based victims. And I mean, that makes sense. There's a lot of victims that are forced to stay home with their abusers now. A lot of spouses and children that are just confined to their homes with their abusers.
Yeah, not to mention maybe someone wasn't like an abuser before, but being shoved in a space together for days and months and, months on end, they might get annoyed with one another. And it just seems like there's been quite a leap of cases.
Yeah, one Boston hospital saw a doubling of their domestic violence cases as of August last year. And they even said that the injuries they were seeing were more severe than they had seen it on average in past years. So in a lot of places, there's definitely an escalation. I saw a lot of information out of Boston where domestic violence had increased a lot. So it's not everywhere, but in these cities, in a lot of different places where people are more, city life changed a lot more for people over the past year. So it makes sense that they had a bigger changes to deal with. So that's something to keep in mind, especially with things opening back up. Just check on your friends, make sure everyone's doing good. So in the book, Grace isn't physically beaten often. Like when she had her escape attempts and stuff, he would be physical with her, but beatings weren't necessarily like a regular part of their marriage.
Yeah, he was more of mental. He liked the mental control aspect more than like a physical.
But he did display a lot of the characteristics of a narcissist, of an abuser. And one of the things that comes up a lot in the abuse situations is love bombing, which I feel like he portrayed in the book. Love bombing is kind of at the beginning of these relationships, just like a huge show of affection and adoration. And it can be super flattering to the person receiving it. And it can come off really romantic, but really it's just another form of manipulation. And it can be anything from constant compliments, constant expensive gifts or trips or, flowers every single day. It can be constant texts or calls, or like they can't leave your side, like they just have to be with you all the time. It can be grandiose romantic gestures or justifying things with like fate or destiny or using the word soulmate or, it's God's plan for us to be together, that kind of thing. It can also look like rushing into things, like the relationship moves really quickly, even to like moving in very fast, marrying very fast, which we saw in the book. And it's really a key tool for narcissists to pull in their victims. And like I said, a lot of people see this as very flattering, like love at first sight. It's, it's nice to have someone like adore you, but it's just to an extreme degree. And in the book, he progresses their relationship super fast, not necessarily to control Grace that much. I think it's more like in his case, it's more because he doesn't want to have to go on with the facade of like being a good guy. Like he just wants to get it over with, and like get there before Millie turns 18 and gets out of the school. So like I said, it's a little bit different, but in real relationships, love bombing is definitely a red flag.
Along with love bombing, there's a lot of other tactics that abusers will use, including isolating the victim from family and friends. This can be as simple as ensuring that contact just kind of fades over time. Sometimes it can go in tandem with the love bombing cling, like why would you want to spend time with anyone else but me and stuff like that. Or as complex as manipulating strife within families or friend groups, causing problems so that way they don't want to talk to you. In the book, this happens whenever Jack mentions his idea and his plan with Grace about how he's going to slowly start taking her out less and make people forget about her, or they're just going to decline all of these events, and then soon they're not even going to want to hang out with her because they know she always says no. So that's kind of like his way of getting Grace alone. Financial control is another thing that abusers will use a lot of the time. They often will maintain a firm hold on finances and control the victim's means of escaping. This may also mean they make the victim quit their job, as in the book, or they have joint accounts, or they take everything that the victim could use to buy things like credit cards or money. Jack did this in the book to Grace, and he also controlled her in Thailand by taking her passport so she was unable to leave the country without his assistance unless she went to the British embassy, and that would take forever, So he was able to control her like that as well. Another thing that will happen in an abusive relationship would be breaking down someone's confidence. So abusers can make their victims feel like they are unworthy or they don't deserve healthy, loving relationships, and that the problems and violence are pretty much just their fault. They can also convince victims that they wouldn't survive without the abuser. Much like in the book, he makes her feel as though her choice could destroy Millie's life and that it would all be on her shoulders if she did that. And that even if she wanted to try anything, she wouldn't succeed because he's always one step ahead of her. He's smarter than her. Like, she shouldn't even put forth the effort, really breaking down her confidence. They also make their victim feel guilty. So abusers will sometimes threaten suicide or convince the victim that the only compassionate move is to stay, or that involving other people would just harm the abuser, and it would be the victim's fault if they lost their social standing or if they had to kill themselves or whatever else. It's all the victim's fault. In the book, Jack made her decide in the car, for example, whenever they were going to the airport, rather she's going to pick Millie or him. It's very much a guilt trip where he's like, you're going to pick your new husband and our life together, or are you going to pick Millie who just broke her leg? Like, what are you going to pick? And pretty much made her feel guilty for either choice she was going to have to make.
Which, side note, if someone gives you an ultimatum,
dump his ass.
Yeah, pretty much pick whatever the other option is, because it's probably not worth it.
That guy from TikTok?
Yeah.
Dump his ass.
Dump his ass.
Also, a lot of times they'll use children or even like other family members that may reside in the home as an excuse to get the victim to do what they want. So abusers can use children as a bargaining chip and threaten in custody battles. In the book, you can kind of see this as an example with Millie. So Jack would threaten to take away the time that Grace was going to be able to spend with Millie and would threaten to send her to an institution because he controlled all the funds and all the legal paperwork in their marriage. So really, he was like, if anything happens to you or if I decide to say something, basically she's going to go where I tell her to go. And it kind of was his way of keeping Grace on a string. And lastly, Brittany kind of already discussed this one, but manipulation is a big thing, controlling what they're thinking in their mind and like what they do by what the abuser is saying and how the abuser is acting. It's like all of this is pretty much a way of manipulation, but gaslighting is a big one. So Brittany mentioned that it's just kind of making the victim feel like they're crazy and like they're losing trust in themselves because they're like, well, this is what you said. And the abuser would say, no, it's not. You're making that up, or something like that, making them feel like they're wrong, even though they were right. Sometimes it's even a more pointed form of psychological abuse.
Domestic violence tends to work in a cycle. Usually there's a tension phase where the victim starts modifying their behavior to avoid triggering some event. It can feel like walking on eggshells, just feeling dread and worry about everything, making sure everything's perfect, trying to minimize the things that would trigger anger or violence. And this in itself is psychological trauma. It can really affect people for a long time when they feel like they have to just be so delicate with every single move they make, every word they say. This inevitably leads to a crisis phase with some explosion of emotion. It can be violence, destroying things, screaming, heightened drug and alcohol abuse, public outbursts, anything like that. And after that, there's usually a calm period, and this can be huge apologies, displays of affection, assurances that it will never ever happen again and that they'll definitely get help and things will change. The cycle repeats itself over and over again, and generally as the relationship progresses, it escalates in severity. So each outburst will be a little bit worse. Things will progress from maybe screaming to slapping and then to more severe beatings and things like that. And it tends to go that the lows get lower. So the violence escalates, the abuse escalates, and those calm phases generally never get quite as high. So the first time it happens, it may be, super high and they buy you a car or a trip to Hawaii or whatever to apologize of it'll never happen again. And then the next time it's like a little bit less and a little bit less. And for some people, this calm period isn't even that calm. It's just kind of less tense than the other periods. On average, a victim will try to leave an abusive partner 7 to 12 times before they either succeed in leaving or are killed. Leaving is by far the most dangerous time for domestic violence victims. Even up to 18 months after leaving, the danger is super high. So it's a really dire situation. And there are many, many factors that can limit a victim's desire or ability to leave a situation. it's easy to kind of judge and just be like, well, leave. Even in the reviews for this book that I was reading, a lot of people were just like, she should have just left. She had all these opportunities to just leave. Like, I think in the book she was trying to illustrate how it's not just, I mean, he did physically control her. You know, she was locked in a room, she was locked on the balcony, but he also completely mentally controlled her with Millie, with telling everyone that she's crazy, you know, all of these things. So it can be easy to judge a situation and be like, oh, she should have done this or that. But there are a lot of reasons why it just doesn't work that way.
Not to mention that, I mean, he had this perfect layout of like her mental like state and how she was frantic and would lose it sometimes and how she had to be on medication. And then the thing that happened in Thailand. So it was like the more she reacted, the more it proved his point. Because everyone else outside of the relationship saw it as this perfect relationship. So she really wasn't in a place for escaping it.
Exactly. And for some victims, they over justify the behavior. It can be really hard to see a situation clearly when you're in it. So for some people, they just don't realize how bad it is until it's bad. There's also what we talked about with the financial control. Some victims don't have the means to escape. They, you know, it takes money to do anything, to get food, to have a hotel, to get a car. I mean, anything you do takes money. So if you have absolutely no control over it, it can be very hard. There's also a lack of access to resources like shelters. I know for male victims, it can be very hard to find shelters that will allow them to stay. So it can be hard to find a place to stay, to find a place to get out. With children, it just makes it even harder because there's custody issues. There's not just escaping yourself, but escaping with other people that you're completely responsible for. There's a lot of cultural or religious expectations that can kind of limit someone's ability to leave. And there's, like we said, with the book, he really portrayed her in the community as crazy, disturbed, you know, prone to these outbursts, but that he was taking good care of her. So that can definitely happen too, where people will assume that no one will believe them, that their partner is, you know, upstanding in their community, and that no one would believe what happens behind closed doors. There's definitely a stigma surrounding domestic violence victims. So it can be hard if you think that no one's going to believe you. I know, again, for male victims, this can be hard because a lot of people are just like, oh, that can't happen, even though it does. There's hopelessness pertaining to the legal system, thinking like, oh, I wouldn't get custody of my kids anyway, or, you know, I would just not be able to fight the divorce or the custody or anything like that. And like we've said several times now, there's the psychological terror inflicted, there's threats and manipulation. And after so many of those instances where your confidence and self-esteem and just grip on your old life is just broken down over and over and over again, it can be really hard to recover from that and to be confident enough to think that not only can you leave, but you deserve a lot better than that. And in terms of manipulation in the book, when Jack would create these situations that prompted Grace to try to run, like he would make her think that he, you know, forgot to do this, or like forgot to lock the door, and she would take it as an opportunity to run, only to find that he orchestrated the entire thing, and then he would punish her for it because he liked that cat and mouse game. So that kind of psychological manipulation would really make you think twice about any kind of escape plan, because it's like, is this real? When she received the book from Esther, and it was like, did Esther shade the words in the book, or did he do it? And she had to work that out for herself, because at first she saw it and she was like, oh, like, thank goodness someone is looking out for me. But then she thought about it more and she was like, it's actually him trying to manipulate me again. Psychological violence is actually the most common type of intimate partner violence. So that being very prominent in the book, there's definitely a lot of connections to real life.
Now diving into some true crime cases, these things really happen, so that way we can connect it to the book and we can see how accurate B.A. Paris was to real life situations. Starting off with domestic abuse towards Grace that happened in the book, there's a woman named Kim Gentle, and she went through some of the similar things. Kim had a very prestigious job in children's publishing and she wanted to move to New York. She met a guy and initially things were really good with him. As usual, you get into a relationship or you meet someone, you're trying to, attract them and you're very kind, you're on your best behavior, you're not farting around each other. Everyone's happy, and that's usually how these kind of situations work. That's how any relationship works. About 3 months in, the red flags started just kind of getting shoved in her face. They became like super glaring. He had quickly made her dependent on him. In her words, quote, "He made a big scene at my work, so I had to leave my job, and then I became financially dependent on him, and I had to buy a car for us because I lost my company car. He made me buy a manual knowing that I can't drive a manual." End quote. So he really was putting her in a tough situation. He also was playing mind games. He would hide her keys or her birth control pills or subway card for days on end. He called all of her male friends and colleagues and told them to leave her alone, and he prohibited her from going out alone even looking at people while they were walking around. So he really made her close your peripherals like a horse, you know?
Yeah, he made her walk around with her head pointed at the ground. She wasn't allowed to look at anyone or engage with anybody when they were out.
He also would physically abuse her, and he even strangled her. She decided to end the relationship and told him to get his stuff and get the heck out of Dodge. When she got home that night, she heard some strange noises as she was going to bed, which obviously if you're getting out of an abusive relationship and you hear that, break the window, run, it doesn't matter, just get out of there. She went to investigate though and found that her ex-partner was hiding in a bedroom. She took her dog and stayed in her bedroom with him upstairs, and she was really fearing for her safety. She was like, what's he going to do? He knows that I know he's up there. I'm hiding. What's going to happen? The next morning, she had to go to another city for a conference, and he asked if he could walk her dog one last time before he left. She relented and left for her conference, only to get a call from him saying that the dog was missing and that she needed to come home. Later, she learned that he had thrown her dog from a cliff and killed it. Side note, we obviously saw what happened to the dog in the book. This is another situation with the dog. Just don't leave your dog with crazy people, just don't do it.
Violence against animals is definitely
one of the top things.
Yeah, a huge red flag in a lot of the cases we've talked about.
Things were so bad that she figured it wouldn't end until one of them was dead, but she would not go to jail for killing him. She then attempted suicide. Her family knew something was off, but they were not nearby, so they didn't really see the magnitude of everything going on. Finally, a friend decided that enough was enough, and they started getting her family together to put an end to this. They involved the police and a crisis counseling team, but no one could pull her out of there unless she gave the go-ahead. Otherwise, it would be considered kidnapping. Kim's brother pulled up to her house and told her to get into the car, that he would take her for coffee against the wishes of the partner. She obliged, and her brother told her that she had two choices. She could leave now with him or with the police. The police had known this man had a violent history, and she spent 8 hours giving her statement to what she experienced. The police took her back to her house to grab some of her belongings, and while there, her partner drove by and the police arrested him. She was so psychologically drained that she had a hard time assimilating back into having control over her life. She knew that she was going to have to face him in court, and she moved back to her small hometown and went into a 2-year treatment to pull herself back together and, compose herself before she had to go to court. She decided that she didn't want any medications to deal with her trauma. She decided instead that she would just ride and work with horses, and she now runs a horse workshop for Indigenous children.
The next connection is about women being held hostage by their husbands, and the case that we found was that of Polly Mitchell. Polly met her future husband David in June of 1993. She was 17 years old, working at the Taco Bell drive-thru, and David happened to come through, and she caught his eye, and he just kept coming through the drive-thru. He would bring her gifts and money and all kinds of stuff. She thought that he was super cute, charming, and fun, so they started dating, and it moved pretty quick. Like I said, they started dating in June. By August, they had moved in together, and they were married by September. So it was very, very fast progression, similar to the book. David was her first boyfriend, her first serious relationship, so she just kind of was happy with the attention, and falling in love. 3 months after their first date, he began to physically abuse her.
Which, if you look at the timeline, they started dating in June. 3 months later, June, July, August, September would be September when they got married. So kind of like the book, the physical abuse started whenever the marriage kind of happened and commenced.
Polly didn't really feel like she could confide in anybody or tell them what was going on, so she just sort of stuck with it, figured things would get better eventually. They ended up having 4 children together, and things did not get better. David actually escalated in behavior, as we often see. He nailed the windows shut and covered them. He locked her and the children from the outside of the house. He installed these deadbolts that he could open. He set alarms on the home, so if she tried to escape, it would go off. He prohibited her from having a cell phone, just like Grace in the book. And David would check the landline numbers that were dialed. Each day when he left, he would dial a certain number. And then when he came home, he would do the, what was it, star 69, where dials the last number dialed. And he would make sure that the numbers matched so he could tell if she had dialed out to anybody. She was not allowed to leave the house without him at all. He monitored all of her phone calls and communication with family and friends. He even sat outside the door during her baby shower for her first child, and he repeatedly called her just over and over again and asked her who she was with, if she was with a man in there, and, at her own baby shower, he was asking if she was with a guy. He was pretty much convinced at all times that she was finding ways to cheat on him, that guys were coming into the house, even though he had it locked up tight, that anything that she was doing, if she even watched, the wrong TV show, he would assume that it was because she thought that a male character was attractive, and he would see it as this attack against him. So he was very, very insecure and definitely projected that onto her. Polly was brutally beaten frequently. David raped her, she said, 5 to 6 times a day throughout their marriage. Even when she was pregnant, he even beat her in front of the children. He had a huge problem with drugs and alcohol, so he was constantly drunk, constantly high. In 2003, Polly was reaching a breaking point, and she really feared for her children. Her son had started becoming violent, and Polly was scared of what that was going to develop into. In the book, we heard Jack's story where his father was super violent, and then he carried that on. It can definitely be a generational thing. It can be this cycle that just keeps going. David had come from an abusive home as well. His mother had actually killed his father in a domestic dispute. So he had that kind of similar background and just carried on that cycle forward with his family. Around 2003, David decided to install internet in the home so he could start a business. And Polly took advantage of this. She had never had this link to the outside world before. So she took the, how the internet used to have to plug a whole bunch of stuff into your computer. She took the cord and plugged it into the fax machine so she could call out. She called her mother and she called a YWCA for help, and they all helped her put this plan in motion. On the day it was time to escape, she phoned her mother, and her mother rushed over to help her. The police were there. There was a victim's advocate also involved. Polly was really too scared to make the move that day. She was very scared to take the covering off the window. When the day actually came for it to be over, it was a very terrifying prospect for her. But she did, and the police were there to help her come through the window with the children, and she ended up escaping on June 2nd, 2003. On June 13th, David was arrested. He pled no contest and was convicted of false imprisonment, terroristic threats, and child abuse in 2004. He really wanted to just have probation and be let go, but he actually received 14 to 20 years with the possibility of parole beginning in 2011. Polly said she thought that David would kill her or the children if she tried to leave, and that's one of the reasons that she felt like she had to stay. Again, abusers have a way of diminishing confidence and cutting off all connections to the outside world, so it can really feel like there's no way out. His own mother knew exactly what was going on, though, and she said she didn't support it. She didn't really like it, but she never got Polly help or the children help, and she just let it happen. So
don't be like that.
Yeah.
Just don't be like that.
Polly's own family knew something was kind of off with David, with her behavior, but they really had no idea the depth of what was going on. Once Polly had finally escaped the nightmare, she said that she had to work really hard, but she's gaining a lot of confidence. She and the kids went through a lot of therapy, and one of her daughters had to be hospitalized due to depression. Her 9-year-old at the time, who was the one that was certain to have the violent tendencies, was working really hard on resolving that. Polly became a nurse, and she tells her story to other people to bring awareness and education surrounding the issue of domestic violence. But she and her mother really still live in fear that David's going to come after her. The county prosecutor said that she didn't think David knew that what he was doing was wrong. She said, quote, "I really think that he believes that it was his right because it was his family and that was his wife," end quote. So that's a pretty disgusting aspect to it. Polly said something similar where she really didn't think that he understood that what he was doing was that bad. And so he didn't really even put up a fight when they arrested him because he was just kind of like, okay. But he didn't understand the gravity of what he was doing, I guess, which honestly is more terrifying because he just thinks that it's fine to control people, to abuse people, to rape his wife, to hurt his children. So pretty awful. I couldn't find any super recent updates on the case. And one of Elizabeth Smart's captors is Brian David Mitchell. So when you search like David Mitchell, that's a lot of what comes up. But if we find any updates on it, we will share that on probably Facebook and Twitter. So definitely follow us on there if you want updates on any of the cases that we are talking about.
Going on to our last section of how this book relates to true crime is secret rooms and homes, specifically ones meant for malicious intent. The first one is a story from a Reddit user about Joshua's room. It's not necessarily something that we have confirmed as criminal, We don't know. This could just be someone sketching on the wall. There's no investigation done to it that I know of, but we thought it was just really eerie, and it kind of connected in a weird way where it sounds like someone possibly could have been held captive there. Some house hunters were looking around and they found this really cool house that they decided to check out, but they got a little nervous when they got to the basement. There were peepholes on the bottom of the staircase that were leading into the home, and they saw writing on the wall about quote unquote Joshua's room and Joshua's rules. And some of the rules were, quote, "No watching Isaiah through the hole," end quote. "No writing or drawing on the wall," end quote. There was also some scribblings around the wall that said, quote, "Stop watching me," end quote. Now, we can't really confirm that anything crazy happened there, or if it was just something, innocent. Doesn't really sound innocent, but, innocent until proven guilty, that sort of aspect. But it was super weird, and we thought we would throw that in here as something that was kind of similar to the dark room in the basement where a lot of the red room was, and that he planned on keeping Millie in the book.
Another story is that of a man named Ayula Ajayi. I don't know if I said that right, hopefully. He lived in Salt Lake City, and he went by AJ. And AJ had been planning something pretty awful for a long time. In April of 2019, he was trying to hire contractors to work on his house. He decided to create a room under the front porch. So he hired a contractor named Brian Wolf, and Brian went over to his house to, talk to him about the project. And he got a pretty bad feeling about the things that AJ was asking for. AJ wanted this space under the porch to be hollowed out and had a lot of strange requests that had a lot of weird excuses along with them. He wanted the room to be a secret, so couldn't see it from the outside. He said his girlfriend was a Mormon, so he needed somewhere to hide his alcohol so she wouldn't see it. He also wanted the room soundproofed. He said that he played a lot of loud music and didn't want to disturb people. He also wanted these weird large hooks installed into the concrete of the wall above head height, and he said it was for a wine rack. And Brian Wolf was like, "Oh, I can install a better wine rack than that, if I'm going to do this room anyway." And he was like, "Oh, no, I just want the hooks." He also wanted this high-tech thumbprint lock on the door for security, he said. But all in all, Brian Wolf got a really bad feeling about this and refused the job and was just really wigged out by these requests. Just a very strange thing to ask for. And 3 months later, he was watching TV and saw the same house that he had been at on the news. And he learned that AJ had actually murdered a woman named Mackenzie Lewick and burned her body. He recognized the house and was horrified to learn that AJ was pretty much asking him to help build like a torture chamber. So, very scary prospect. He said it was a very unsettling situation.
That kind of wraps up our discussion about behind closed doors and all the true crime stories that can kind of relate to it. That, at least the ones we're going to talk about in this episode. Obviously, there's thousands of cases that could relate to this, millions of cases, honestly. But we really hope you liked the book. We hope you liked this episode. We were really excited about it. I think both of us thoroughly enjoyed the book. We finished it in a matter of a few days.
Yeah, it was one of those where you just wanted to keep reading. You were just so... You just needed to see what was happening.
Yeah, such a little eager beaver. But our next episode is going to come out for the Abyss Book Club, ABC. Is coming out on July 2nd, and we will be reading Race Against Time by Jerry Mitchell. To kind of give you a summary about what it is, so you know a little bit more, the synopsis is, quote, on June 21st, 1964, more than 20 Klansmen murdered 3 civil rights workers. The killings in what would become known as the Mississippi Burning case were among the most brazen acts of violence during the civil rights movement, even though the killers' identities, including the sheriff's deputy, were an open secret. No one was charged with murder in the months and years that followed. It took 41 years before the mastermind was brought to trial and finally convicted for the 3 innocent lives he took. If there is one man who helped pave the way for justice, it is investigative reporter Jerry Mitchell. In Race Against Time, Mitchell takes readers on the twisting, pulse-racing road that led to the reopening of 4 of the most infamous killings from the days of the civil rights movement, decades after the fact. His work played a central role in bringing killers to justice for the assassination of Medgar Evers, the firebombing of Vernon Dahmer, the 16th Street church bombing in Birmingham, and the Mississippi Burning case. Mitchell reveals how he unearthed secret documents, found long-lost suspects and witnesses, building up evidence strong enough to take on the Klan. He takes us into every harrowing scene along the way, as when Mitchell goes into the lion's den, meeting one-on-one with the very murderers he is seeking to catch. His efforts have put 4 leading Klansmen behind bars years after they thought they had gotten away with murder. Race Against Time is an astonishing, courageous story capturing the historic race for justice as the past is uncovered, clue by clue, and long-ignored evils are brought into light. This is a landmark book and essential reading for all Americans, end quote.
And if you don't know who Jerry Mitchell is, obviously he did a lot of amazing work in helping bring justice in the civil rights movement and to murderers in that situation, but he also has worked on other cases. We mentioned him in case 34. He's actually looking into the Don Lewis disappearance and involved with that. So if you heard that episode or know the Tiger King saga, then you might recognize that name as well. So make sure you pick that book up. We are very excited to read it. I think it's going to be a really, really good one. And we will have a lot to talk about with it. So be sure to grab that and start reading, and we will see you next time.
Thank you for diving into the abyss with us.